rate of change that California is undergoing in the decarbonization efforts, we have to be much more agile in the way that we create policy, try new things, let them fail fast, and that needs to be a very core tenet.
5 years ago, PG&E's reputation was shattered. California's largest utility had filed for bankruptcy after admitted missteps led to catastrophic wildfires. The climate crisis had wreaked havoc in the state most committed to fighting it. But the urgency of the energy transition required a rebirth of PG&E, especially in light of California's quickly approaching climate deadlines. Today, PG&E is dispelling the myth of the infallible utility by lifting the veil on its shortcomings and calling on industry to fill the gaps. I'm John Engel, Editor-in-Chief of Renewable Energy World and Power Grid International. This week on Factor This, I'm joined by Quinn Nakayama, the Senior Director of Grid Research Innovation and Development at PG&E, who's charged with shaping the utility's vision around AI, load growth, and decarbonization. Can utilities, often criticized for dragging innovation, lead the energy transition? That's all next on Factor This from Renewable Energy World. Quinn Nakayama, thanks so much for joining the Factor This podcast. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you.
So I've been looking forward to this one for a while because of two reasons. One, I think it's important to bring the utility perspective and view to this audience, which is mostly the developer IPP crowd in the beginning, but has broadened since then. And I like you, Quinn. We've known each other for a few years now, so it's always good to have a friend on the podcast and be able to riff a little bit on some of this stuff. And you're leading some really incredible work at one of the largest utilities in the country. So no better person to talk to these issues of, AI, load growth, grid software, and really this rebirth that PG&E is still working toward following, the wildfires that we're also familiar with by now. Quinn, start us off. For those that don't know you as well as I do, give a brief description of your background and lead us into some of the work you're doing now with PG&E.
Sure. And John Engel, you're not too bad yourself. So
I appreciate
for having me on.
That was not in the script, but I appreciate you adding that in.
So my name is Quinn Nakayama. I'm the Senior Director for Grid Research, Innovation, and Development here at Pacific Gas and Electric Company, just a small little utility out here on the West Coast in California. The things that we work on over here is we kind of help really guide and run the research and development strategy here at PG&E, making sure that we're really working on areas of innovation for things that really drive home what we consider our true north strategy. And that kind of has multiple facets here. We are battling significant amounts of climate change impacts to our grid. So we're focused on things like wildfire and how do we decrease our costs on undergrounding to make that something that's a really viable solution for us for grid architecture. We're also taking a look at EV strategies. How do we deal with our gas system? What is our gas strategy? And what is the R&D necessary to support that? How do we think about integrated grid planning? What do we think about the energy supply here in California, given what happened in 2020? And how is load management a significant portion of that? And so as we go through these various areas of our True North strategy, we're asking a lot of our key stakeholders, like, what are the things that are missing, right? What are the problem statements that we need as a company to be able to enact upon in order for us to be able to achieve some of these very, very lofty goals that we have in the next 10, 20, 30 years to meet California's decarbonization goals, very, very aggressive decarbonization goals. And what does that all mean for us? And so, what we tried to do is create this organization that can help drive and help the company prioritize where we put very limited resources to be able to bear in order to create these necessary step change innovations and R&Ds on some of the largest problem statements that we have to be able to achieve those goals.
So you have a really small plate. Not a lot going on.
That's no problem, right?
Well, and when I think about what you do, because we do talk fairly often, you are like a vision guy that does have this line to the technical aspects of the grid and the ways that we need to evolve to meet the changing needs of the energy transition. And I know your CEO takes this very seriously too. So you mentioned that the kind of road mapping of where is PG&E headed. And I think, I mentioned, the wildfires. It seems like a real shift in tone from PG&E that we know what happened. We acknowledge our role in it. Now is our opportunity to really set the direction of not only PG&E but really like the utility industry at large, because benchmarking is so critical for all of these utilities around the country. They're looking to California and major entities like PG&E to see, like, how are you going to fix this stuff, or invent the strategies that we need to keep pace. So how do you think about that challenge and really the role of the utility in the energy transition? Because I often think that the siloing of this industry, the energy industry more broadly, is one of the biggest drags on what we're trying to all accomplish here. And you guys are kind of tip of the spear when it comes to decarbonization and meeting those lofty goals that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think, back starting in 2017 and with the October wildfires and then the Camp Fire, our focus had been really over the past um, decade from that period, really focus on eliminating wildfires. Like wildfires just cannot happen from our equipment. And how do we position a lot of our innovations and our research and development toward that? We've been able to implement some significant innovations in those spaces, whether it's been things like the public safety power shutoff when things get windy, or things like enhanced power lines safety shutoffs that we can do to eliminate wildfire risks. We've been able to eliminate, really large wildfires from occurring in California from our power lines, and had a like something like a 95+% reduction in wildfire in terms of fires caused by our electrical equipment. And so it's not like we've finished what we need to do in these areas, but we've been able to now, based upon some of the major improvements that we've made, shift our focus, not shift our focus, let's say, create additional focus areas of where R&D needs to be placed into. And to your point, we've been really focused on how do we meet these California goals for decarbonization, and the increased amounts of load growth that's going to be occurring due to the nature of like doubling our load growth by 2040, and how do we think about that as we shift from, as an example, half of that is most likely going to be coming from electric vehicles. And so, what we did here is we published a report. And the report is the R&D strategy report. And it's one of those things where we know that we play a significant role in decarbonization, but we can't do this alone. We're not a technology company, right? We're not a software company. We're not a hardware company. We really require the ecosystem around us to be able to innovate with us, but they also need to know what areas are we needing to be focused on, right? Typically, what we see is utilities tend to be very, very closeted, I would say, in terms of kind of exposing some of the weaknesses that we have on our system. And I think, PG&E with Patty Poppy and Jason Glickman and so many of the other senior leaders that we have on our team, we're taking a much different type of shift in tone, right? We need the industry's help. We know that. And so how do we go ahead and let the industry know where are the areas of focus? Now, part of this is on the R&D strategy report is to show what those areas of focus needs to be. But the other piece, and in hopes that there are technologies that are already out there, things that are like TRL level 6, 7, or 8, that we can go ahead and quickly innovate into and be able to bring on our system. But it's also a desire for us to publish out what do we really need so that companies can go ahead and identify what can they even develop today. That may have a longer runway, like a TRL level 1 or 2 or 3 item that they can go ahead and start really putting some dollars into, knowing that it may take a little while for those products to come into market, but they know that there's a buyer on the other end of the side spectrum. And, what we're starting to see is, it's just not just a California related issue. Climate change is starting to impact the rest of the nation. So things and innovations that we're doing on wildfire are starting to become applicable to the greater 50 states of the United States, as well as into Canada and some of the other areas. So, and if you apply that to other areas of decarbonization, like electric vehicles, to data centers, to what happens with the gas pipeline as you move into a higher decarbonized state, I think you're going to start to see the rest of the nation also start to swiftly follow in some of these areas. So we think that with the publishing of this R&D strategy report and really trying to have the industry try to see if we can get a rallying point around some of these type of problem statements. It will not just benefit PG&E or California policy in terms of decarbonizing the energy sector, but hopefully spark some greater innovation that can be accommodated in the rest of the nation.
And I think the crux of what you're saying is really interesting, because it's this divergence from the narrative of the infallible utility. We can't do no wrong. We know what we're doing. The lights will come on, but without identifying those gaps or even deficiencies at times, how are you going to efficiently address those issues? And that's what I mean in the shift in tone of PG&E. Is obviously the wildfire experience is incredibly humbling and indicting thing to go through as an entity, but you're shifting now into, once we get the block and tackle done, like, well, once we figure that out, then we can start innovating and really addressing some of these core challenges. I was talking to one of your colleagues who you know really well, Sean Adderley over at PG&E, who's on our Distributech advisory committee, and his comment at our interconnection event, Grid Tech Connect Forum, a couple of weeks ago was, interconnection is suffering a bit in our territory because of wildfires. Like, wildfires have to be priority number one right now, and until we get a really firm grasp on that, we are limited in what we can do elsewhere. So with all that being said, I'm really interested in how you view innovation and where PG&E is going, because you have these core responsibilities, wildfires and vegetation management, which accounts for most of the outages that we see on the power grid, that consumers don't think about, trees being the biggest culprit of their lights not turning on. Now we're talking about AI and load growth, and can utilities keep up? Like, help me frame for this audience how critical some of those pieces are. Like, should we be worried about the strain on the grid, or is this something that utilities will adapt to and continue to evolve? Or is it the latest shiny object? How do you deal with the shiny objects?
That's a multifaceted question. So let me
Yeah.
see if I can break this part into various components. I think, as we think about the investments that we've had to make in wildfire, as an example, we've had to push billions of dollars of infrastructure investments, as well as expense on vegetation management, things like that, into areas of very low load growth areas. And so that's just the nature, right? You have these mountainous conditions that we have here in California, highly forested conditions. We've had, the state is still recovering from massive amounts of droughts that we've had over the past couple of decades, with bark beetle infestation, and now we're starting to see this pattern of just high rain during the winter times, as well as high dry seasons during the summer times. That's been significantly impacting. But when you do that, you're placing a whole bunch of investment, capital and expense, much needed, into areas of very low growth, right? And what we've seen, you've seen a lot of things that are in the press lately regarding where our rates are going, and rates are pretty simple to calculate. You take the overall costs and you divide it by throughput. It's not as simple as that, but at the very simplistic terms, it is like that. And that calculates rates. And when we've had to do these type of investments in lowly loaded areas, that's you're starting to see some of the impacts of the rate increases that we're seeing on our customers. The way to counterbalance rate increases is two ways. One of them is you look for ways to be more efficient, right? Reduce costs. But the other way is to, with that cost aspect in mind, increase throughput. When you have more customers and you are generating more load on the system, and you're putting investments that enable higher degrees of load growth, you actually have a rate reducing impact, right? And as we think about electrification, this is one of the biggest opportunities for utilities to be able to bring on significant amounts of load, and if we do this right, have a rate reducing impact at the same time. And I think if we do this correctly, we can, yes, we've had to make those investments. Yes, those have had those rate pressures. We can now kind of turn that rate pressure into a downwards rates type of way, if we're able to invest in areas that are going to bring in a significant amount of load growth. And we're starting to see some of that, right? With electric vehicles coming in and the amount of load that's bringing onto the system from fuel switching. And then things like data centers also coming in. Those type of loads will generate high degrees of revenue for the company, and that allows us to reduce rates in the way that our regulatory rate settings is kind of structured.
So how do you get ahead of that though? Because I feel like the data center conversation and the strain on the grid that we keep hearing, and this seems to be like the most popular talking point in our industry right now, is very similar to the one that we've been having for the last 10 years around electric vehicles. Is utilities know that they can't just go throughout the system and upgrade everything. One, that's not like financially prudent. Regulatory bodies won't allow that either because they're worried about gold plating and so on. So when PG&E is forecasting, I can't remember what the number was that you guys just put out, the gigawatts of new load over the next 10 15 years coming from data centers. How do you not follow that load? How do you get ahead and prepare for that opportunity on your end, and really convince the CPUC that these are worthwhile investments?
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to is a couple things. One of them is that we also have to understand that a lot of these loads that are coming onto the system are highly flexible. When you talk about data centers, not all data centers are equal. You have the typical cloud-based data centers. Now those, what we've seen don't have a lot of availability to be flexible. They're base load. They have to be on all the time. They need really high degrees of reliability, and they need to be located in particular areas, which is close to their customer. The amount of latency that can be between them and their customers has to be so low that they have to have that type of co-location. The type of data centers growth that we're seeing today is more around AI ML, right? These type of artificial intelligence, machine learning type of data centers. And what those are is those don't have necessarily the latency related concerns that most traditional data centers do, and they can be kind of spread out throughout the service territory. And they're also highly flexible, right? And so they can have the ability to turn down or turn up when needed. And they have a lot more that they can do in terms of providing that type of load flexibility that may provide us an opportunity to create and interconnect these type of customers without having to do those upgrades, or maybe not having to do as much upgrades, similar to like the electric vehicle, right? The electric vehicle is a highly, highly flexible load. And so if we think about, these two aspects of, can we utilize these as grid resources so that we don't have to do as much wires investment and can get them interconnected as fast as possible? That is the type of innovations that we're trying to take a look at. I'll give you an example. One of them that Patty likes to talk about is for the high-speed fast chargers. This is a great example of a place where we've seen significant innovation that the team has been able to put together that enables these high-speed fast chargers to come in a lot faster. So typically what a high-speed fast charger, like let's say a 4 megawatt load, wants to interconnect into a system, what sometimes happens is that there's not enough capacity on that particular feeder or that bank that they want to be located on. And so our interconnection study will take a look at this, and our distribution planning will look at this, and they'll say, well, during the summer season, we're going to be highly loaded on that circuit. I can give you maybe half. I can give you 2 megawatts during that 6-month window. And then during the winter time, hey, we're not as highly loaded in the winter time. You can have your 4 megawatts during that entire wintertime loading period. And maybe in about 3 years, we'll have the upgrades necessary to provide you for the full load. For an EV fast charger, it's not exactly an optimal situation. They'll take it, but it's not optimal. What we have found is that when you take a look at a daily kind of forecast, the need to be able to curtail them down to 2 megawatts is actually only maybe about 5% of the time. It really depends on circuit to circuit and how many customers are looking to interconnect. But in this particular situation, 95% of the time, they were able to get all the load that they needed from the circuit. And it was only during these really unique situations on our grid, the highest temperature on a heat wave back to back, that we had these significant strains on our distribution system, that we would maybe need to curtail them down to 2%, down to 2 megawatts. We now have an advanced distribution management system that can help us with these day-ahead forecasting on distribution system through our partnership with Schneider Electric. And we've now also with Schneider put together a DERMS system. And what that enabled us to do is say, okay, hey, tomorrow, like yesterday, for example, and here in California, it was like 100 degrees. Today, and where I'm kind of sitting, and the high is going to be around 75 degrees. And maybe yesterday we might have needed to curtail some of these units down to that 2 megawatt limit in that example, but today we wouldn't. You can have all 4 megawatts. We're not looking at highly loading based upon what we're seeing today. So in those type of situations, we can send a signal. The EV fast chargers will accept those signals, will bring down their load to whatever limit that we say. And by the way, it'll be an hourly load. So maybe they only need to limit themselves for only 2 hours, and they have the necessary energy management systems to curtail. We accept that signal, and hey, lo and behold, they can get all 4 megawatts 95+% of the time. That is one of those solutions that we're looking to really bring in that helps those people interconnect those loads as fast as possible with the cheapest amount of cost. And eventually we're going to upgrade that system where, these type of capabilities might not be needed for at least that use case, and enables us to get those loads on a lot faster.
And it sounds like, based on that description, with like an AI ML data center, obviously a larger scale than a fast charging site, but you would go through a similar flexible interconnection agreement that incorporates your DERMS platform and say that, let us bump you up or down when we need to. But the trade-off for you is that we get to bring you online hopefully faster than the 36 plus months that it's taking today across the country to get those centers online. Is that
Yep.
is that why you kind of temper the concern a little bit around, whether this is going to be just such a cataclysmic event for utilities to keep up with all this AI demand? You seem to think that, we have the tools today to adapt and make smart investments.
We have some of the tools. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we have all the tools necessary to make this not a problem, but that is a tool that we have in our toolbox. Now, not every circuit's the same, not every bank's the same, not every portion of our service territory is the same. So it really is going to be case to case dependent, but it is a tool that these customers can use that enables them to get their loads on much faster. But again, there's a lot more that's needed, right? Things like additional investments in distributed generation, things like being able to bring on more distributed energy storage. Those will all help potentially lower the amount of investments that are required in order to bring on more load onto the system.
Do you mean on site at these heavy loads, or do you mean within PG&E's system strategically placed a la non-wires alternative? Like what's your thought? What's your thought?
I think it's going to be both. I think it's going to be both, right? So for data centers loads, we have been seeing a lot more data centers who are willing to bring on behind the meter type of assets in order for them to interconnect faster. For them, speed is king. Getting onto the system and getting their data centers up and running is of the largest priority. So if they can only get a certain amount of capacity, but they want to be located in a particular area, they'll bring on behind the meter resources to lower their need from their utility. And then they can interconnect tomorrow. And then eventually maybe they may be able to not have to use those resources and can pick them up and move them somewhere else when the upgrades are completed on our side. But what that enables them to do is come online a lot faster. And we need the ability to do non-wires investments so that we don't have to do that transmission upgrade. We don't have to do those distribution upgrades, or at least can defer it for a substantial enough time that it makes a difference. And that those customers who are looking to interconnect into the system can do so without having to wait for that wires upgrade. So I think, John, it's going to be a little bit of both.
When you talked about acknowledging where the gaps exist, maybe this is the opportunity to dive into some of that in your road mapping process of saying, which I love. I love going out to the industry and saying, here's what we don't do well or what we're missing, fix it, and we'll buy it. What are some of those key areas? I guess you can share, as it relates to AI and data centers, but even more broadly that you say, we need your help. Come help us.
I would say the biggest piece is on transmission, distribution, co-simulation. So I'm going to get a little bit nerdy, and I'm going to try not to get
you can do it with this audience.
The biggest thing is that, and most utilities do the same thing. Their transmission planning happens over here with a certain application, and then their distribution planning happens over here with other types of applications. And What we really need is the ability to do something that can take a look at this in the middle and bring both of those components together. Now, when it comes to really high voltage 230, 500 kV transmission systems, maybe co-optimization doesn't make too much sense just because it's all these bulk generation and loads kind of intermingling and power flow becomes really complicated. But when it comes to smaller kV transmission like 115 or our 60 or 70 kV system, those are really kind of more geared toward feeding distribution load. And when we need to upgrade those type of systems, those can be pretty massive projects, right? Tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to upgrade those type of systems. And being able to say, okay, well, here is a particular transmission system, 60, 70 kV system, and here's all the underlying distribution loads. If you can figure out whether those are coincidental or not in terms of where their peaks are, because I will say with bringing on more and more centralized storage and solar onto our grid, the system load shapes and our distribution load shapes are starting to uncorrelate. Going from zero correlation all the way to negative correlation, you're starting to see, hey, well, these are no longer coincidental peaks. Or if you were to just follow a system signal, you may actually exacerbate issues on the local distribution or transmission system. And so if you're able to take a look at this in a much more microcosm area where you're looking at a local transmission system, are able to tie it to the distribution system that it serves, find the coincidental areas, and then you may be able to pull together an economic evaluation that says, okay, this local transmission upgrade costs X amount of money, and the local distribution each by in itself costs a much smaller amount of money at each location. If you were to bundle that all together and say, hey, listen, that's the value of not doing those wires upgrades for a certain period of time. Can we now go out and do either a procurement or figure out how to leverage existing DERs to be able to not have to do those wires investments by bringing down the load curve or flattening the load curve as much as possible and getting outside of those just peaky related nature. And that allows us to actually increase our utilization of our wires investments. So those are the types of systems that we really need that can bring those two pieces together and help us identify scenarios by which we can co-optimize all of those DER resources, where they need to be acquired or they can be leveraged for what we think is coming on, to be able to defer those wires investments in a cost-effective way.
Let's talk about software too on that note. So you were mentioning the partnership with Schneider, which I know is pretty deep with PG&E, and do they provide your ADMS as well, or just DERMS?
They do.
Okay, so DERMS and ADMS, and for those that don't know, advanced distribution management systems, more of an advanced control and communication platform than those of old. And then DERMS is the hot new phrase in our industry, distributed energy resource management systems, which goes on top of an ADMS to hopefully allow a utility to have more intelligent and real-time control over all of these assets that are out in the field. What I hear about in all the off-the-record conversations that no one likes to have with me on this podcast is that world is kind of messy right now, in that a number of regulatory bodies want to see utilities investing in this smart grid software to better utilize assets in the field, better communicate with customer resources, all that kind of stuff. And deployment, at least the way I'm told, has been kind of clunky. And that, a DERMS could be this Swiss Army knife that the grid really needs, but most of the offerings in the market today do a few things. They do a few things really well, and all the other stuff gets thrown by the wayside. Like, how do you view that evolving landscape and what you need from industry to really dynamically interact with a system that is changing so quickly?
It's a good question.
I've been thinking about this one a lot, Quinn. And I think I've actually I may have brought it up to you in the past before, but I hear even at events like ours, like Distributech, DERMS is everywhere. Everyone's got a DERMS. And I think in reality, most people think there are 3 to 4 real products out there. So interested in your take on it.
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to is, what do you want to do with that system? And how is it going to create value? You start there. The system is just a system, right? They can create different type of capabilities and functionality within the system. These software providers are very ingenious and can develop these type of capabilities very quickly. It's really about where do you want to get the value, right? And so what we did on our side, at least, is you could go after like this massive DERMS implementation platform that gives you all these bells and whistles, but if you don't know what you're going to do with it, it's just sitting out there as wasted utilization of a software platform. What we did is we said, okay, well, we partnered with Microsoft, a significant amount of utility-based expertise based upon some of the practices that they've been growing. And then we also partnered with Schneider and we said, okay, let us co-develop what our DERM strategy roadmap might look like before we even implemented anything, which is a little bit different. Like you're bringing in particular vendors in prior so that you can try to figure out how to build it in the future. Now, the reason why we did this is because we already signed up with Schneider as an ADMS system. We knew we had to go there first. Getting the visibility of how DERs were going to actually operate on our system was number one priority. And we were just saying the vast amounts of DERs that were happening on our system, whether they're EV, battery storage, or solar happening, we needed the ability to forecast what was happening on our system on any given portion of our system. You can only do that with an ADMS system. But since we already had Schneider's ADMS system, you got to kind of think about maybe DERMS as being a module of ADMS that can consume very quickly the ADMS data and figure out what it needs to go do with it. We then said, okay, well, since ADMS, Schneider, you're our ADMS system, and we did select them because they are one of the best DERMS vendors that are out there, help us build and think through what our DERMS strategy needs to be. And so that's what we did. We hosted these workshops here at PG&E. We said, let's think about all the various use cases that could be out there that the DERs can provide for our system. And then what can DERMS do for us in that space? And so, John, that's a little bit different in the way that industry typically works on this type of stuff. And we really went to a value-centric model. Now, our DERMS system currently doesn't do everything, doesn't, make coffee, wash a car, and do all that type of stuff. It's very built specific for our needs. And then it's a platform. And then you build upon that platform different type of capabilities as you need it. And it can do all those things, but maybe you don't need to have them do everything on day one. And so we focused on that the EV flexible connect example that I gave earlier. And we said, we're going to build a minimal viable product. We're going to get this thing into our system as fast as possible. We're just going to focus on these 2 or 3 use cases, 2030.5 telemetry for low cost telemetry and being able to do this EV smart connect related work. And then do that the same thing for the energy storage guys as well, because load and gen can be curtailed in a similar fashion. And then also making sure that we can get these non-wires contracts that we already have in place operated and executed. So that's kind of how you need to start. And then once you have a partner in play, then you can think about, okay, well, what else do I need to do with that, right? How do I bring on demand response now programs into this platform that enables us to dispatch demand response, not just for system needs. Now maybe I can dispatch it for distribution needs too, and something that our distribution control centers can use as a tool on highly, highly loaded days where we need to give the distribution system a little bit of a break. Maybe we can call on these same demand response resources that would have been used on the system side. We can use them for the distribution side. And help us out there. So those are the types of ways that we're thinking through this. And as new programs come in that we build in conjunction with the California Public Utility Commission, we're able to then build and stack them on the platform that we have already developed rather than having to go out and buy a new software solution just for that new program. We now have this platform, and that platform can now be continued and enhanced and built upon with a partner that's just completely willing to help us walk through this transition. So, John, that's kind of a different type of approach that we've taken, but is kind of the necessary approaches that we think we need to build upon the system to be able to make that next reality, the next type of step into our reality.
Yeah, and I think it's important to share that too, because even some of the largest utilities in this country are still very much in pilot stage or like figuring out what they want to do with the DERMS and don't have it deployed. And like a overly simplified version of the smart grid, at least in my head, I think about like the stack of what you need and advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters, and then your communication and controls SCADA, and then maturing into ADMS, and then layering on top the DERMS, and then having communication networks all over top of it to have this real-time understanding of what the customer is doing and the assets that are in the field, being able to talk to them and being able to control them. So then I guess what is the missing link in that equation? I hear a lot about visibility on the system, like real-time visibility of what's happening at individual circuits and feeders, and this concept of a digital twin of the grid that we've talked about for years and years, like not coming to fruition. Where are your blind spots, and maybe what are your biggest concerns when it comes to that?
I talked a little bit about this transmission distribution, bringing those two together. That's an area that I want to continue to echo is a little bit of a blind spot for us. We're working to try to figure out how to do co-simulation related activities because we know that it's going to be needed. We have a GE Vernova system on the right-hand side, and we use PSLF on the planning side. On the distribution side, we use a Schneider Electric ADMS DERMS system, and then we use LoadSeer and SIGN for planning. So how do we bring these systems together to do that co-simulation is something that we're going to need to focus on. The other aspect that we're already working on, and this gets to, you have to have a value-driven approach, is on the grid edge. Now, if you think about, DistribuTech in particular, the type of themes that we've been seeing at each DistribuTech, it was all about, sensors at one point. Then it became about DERMS, and now, in the recent ones where we've seen the heavy degree of mixture between AI/ML and grid edge, right? And I think what we're seeing is that, at least here in California, when you want to buy an electric vehicle, a lot of people here have 100 amp panels or even smaller on their side of their house. And when they want to go buy an EV, what ends up happening is an electrician will take a look at their panel, 100 amps, they might have an HVAC and maybe a washer and dryer and all this other type of stuff. And they'll be like, you're going to need yourself a 200 amp panel. And when you do that, there is a spiral of potential costs that can get laid upon that related work that makes it really hard for a customer to then want to jump in and buy an electric vehicle. And let's talk a little bit about what those might be. One, you might need to get your house up to code. And that could have a preponderance of cost. Plus, changing out the whole panel has its own costs associated to it. Then you call up the utility and be like, hey, I just upgraded from a 100 amp panel to 200 amp panel. I need you guys to do your work on your side to enable that. Then we go through our service planning processes and be like, well, that service drop that you have with the secondary and that service transformer, that's got to get upgraded too. And now you're not only thousands of dollars out of pocket, but 4 months before you can actually leverage a level 2 charger at your home. You might take a look at all those barriers and be like, screw this. You know what? I'm just going to go buy another ICE vehicle. And I think all of California loses when customers have to make that choice, because now that ICE vehicle is going to be on our system, internal combustion engine vehicle, is going to be on our system for how many years? 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, and not be an electric vehicle. The grid edge innovation work that we're working on right now is going to enable us to not have to have panels be upgraded. We think we have a mechanism to work with customers and their EV charging such that you don't need to upgrade your panel, that your meter can communicate directly to your charger. And as soon as the AC turns on, you don't need to charge at the maximum rate of your electric vehicle output. Maybe it curtails it down just a smidgen. And then as soon as the HVAC kicks off, you're back up in the running, right? And by having this type of capability, you as a customer can live within a 100 amp panel upgrade, 100 amp panel constraint, and still get level 2 charging 48 amp continuous on a 60 amp breaker, as long as you have panel space to be able to do all of that. And we're also, partnering with other type of manufacturers to even take a look at how do we take this even further? How do we interconnect solar? How do we interconnect energy storage behind the meter while still living with some sort of 100 amp panel constraint? Can we do that? And I think the grid edge is going to be the area that demonstrates that value. Now we can get all of those customers to have EVs. Now they can make different decisions. All it requires is a new meter. Okay, give me that new meter and I can go ahead and connect that to my Wi-Fi, get the EV charger to connect to my Wi-Fi, and I'm set. That's it. And I can get a level 2 charger tomorrow. Those are the type of things that we really want to look into, and that creates value. That enables our grid edge innovation, and that enables us to then take that platform to do other things, but you start with the value first.
Yeah, and grid edge is one of those funny terms that like means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I think a lot of what you're talking about is like behind the meter, and how far behind the meter will you let us go? Like in terms of communication, data, controls, that comes, into conflict with customer expectations and security and all those things. And I think that speaks to like the opportunity, but also the challenge, which you're highlighting there is, how much do you want us to give you, and that the back and forth trade there. I want to land the plane here a little bit because we only have a few more minutes, but your role I think is great to answer this question. That utilities are kind of like the boogeyman. You are now the bad guy in many conversations, especially in the context of the energy transition. You're either too slow or too safe. Don't move fast enough. Or let me frame it this way. What advice would you give to other utilities, given that PG&E does have a pretty robust R&D strategy and acts on it, deploys DERMS, deploys ADMS? How do we get out of this pilot stage hell that we do see in a number of territories and move at a pace that's necessary to meet these climate targets? And I guess the back end of that question then is like, does the business model work? And is it equipped to move fast enough to meet these legislative goals that you have in front of you in California and are mandated?
I think with California, we've been uniquely positioned. Part of it has been kind of some of the foresight from even our California Public Utility Commission to create for us an R&D budget that is really geared towards enabling this type of R&D and innovation to occur. California created something called EPIC, right? And the EPIC was a desire to be able to move and have utilities and create a space for utilities of untouchable funding that could only be dedicated for research and development and innovation of this nature to progress the California state goals. And they gave those money over to the IOU, they gave those monies over to the California Energy Commission, and they said, hey, listen, we need you to innovate in these areas. And, when I talk to a lot of our peer utilities around the country, they don't have that luxury. And, they're very constrained on how much they can spend in research and development. And they look towards, and the fortunate portion of the Biden administration was, being able to unlock a lot of dollars towards innovation in the energy space through the work that's been done through the Department of Energy. And if you're able to couple the funding that you can get from the DOE to do a lot of these innovations, and you have innovative programs from your commission that give you access to research and development funding, that's kind of where the sweet space is, right, John? Is that now you have this capability because you need the money, you need the funding, you need the resources to be able to do this related work. And so I think we've been uniquely positioned in California. California has been very, they've been looking at the future for a very long time. They've set up the right regulatory constructs. Then, the federal funding came and put us into this unique position of funding that has enabled us to drive some of this. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop and end there. You have to have leaders that are willing to take a chance on research and development innovation, that see the need of the future and is willing to invest. Because what ends up happening is, you do have to invest now for things that will eventually pay down the line, but that investment needs to happen on day one, right? And if you can have the foresight to say, yes, we're going to spend the money now, knowing that we're going to create that value later when it becomes, a scalable solution, that's a worthy investment. That requires your executive level support. And with folks like Patty and Jason, they have been fully supportive of that because now they have a company strategy with very, very intense 10-year goals, 20-year goals, and knowing that innovation and R&D is the way that it's going to bridge some of those gaps, they're highly committed towards making that work. So it really is the combination of those type of factors that really brings it home. Now, you got to be careful, right? Because even if you have all that funding, and even if you have those resources and the executive backings, what utilities also struggle with is sometimes you do too much, right? And we really, if you're going to scale something, if you do too many pilots, what ends up happening is you go through your investment planning processes where now all of those pilots need to scale, and you find out just how little money that you have for those scalable type of activities where you're trying to take, the 5 units that you did and now make them 5,000. And so, what that really, the urge of caution there is, yes, there's a lot of exciting opportunities, but the ability to prioritize those on value and shrinking the amount that you do to do those very, very quickly, and then scaling those as fast as possible rather than peanut buttering all of your R&D funds and cross 5 million different areas and then struggling later on, is the key that is required to unlock R&D from being just these pilots that are out there to fully scalable. What that requires you to do is it requires you to say no a lot. It's odd, right? But one of the things that I find myself having to do is say no a lot, because what we want to do is we want to scale the things that we have on our plates right now and do that very quickly. And so, being very selective on project selection is also going to be a real key aspect, because it's a really exciting space. You can do a lot, but you want to make sure that it is being done successfully.
All right, Quinn, I've really enjoyed this, and thanks for taking the time to have this pretty wide-ranging conversation. Something I want to point back to your comments in our keynote presentation at Grid Tech Connect Forum, California, a couple of weeks ago. You said something big needs to change for us to hit our climate targets. And your fellow presenter, Scale Microgrid's co-founder Tim Haid, who was also excellent, made the comment that if we can't figure this out in California, no one's going to figure it out. And I thought that was really poignant. Do you feel like the structure, and I'm kind of rephrasing the last question, but are you equipped to move fast enough with the current set of rules and regulations to achieve these goals? And is it realistic for us to think that we can hit them, given the constraints that you're currently under, whether that's a divergence from N-1 or our expectations of reliability or our willingness to take risk? Where do we sit?
That's a great question.
It's the last one,
I
so
think
make it
we
good.
have, yeah, I think we have some of it. Put it this way, we have some of it, right? We have the R&D funding. We have the support of executive leadership. I think there's going to have to be some significant shifts in energy policy, and there's going to have to be a similar move toward the speed at which change can occur in the regulator perspective to be able to try things new out and being able to either, fail fast or scale quickly. That's not necessarily how regulatory constructs work here in California or anywhere in the state. They're very methodological, well thought out processes, don't get me wrong, very data intensive, but they're also a little bit on the slower side. And I don't think that the rate of change that California is undergoing, the decarbonization efforts, we have to be much more agile in the way that we create policy, try new things, let them fail fast. And that needs to be a very core tenet. Failing fast in a regulatory policy can be very difficult. And then giving the capability to scale quickly. Now, that might require even additional more funding from things like in the federal side to be able to enable utilities to scale faster, and create a pocket of dollars for scalability. But these are the type of things, John, that I think are still missing in our California area that I think really need to be hit upon in order for us to truly succeed. It can't just be done on technology alone. It has to be both technology, policy, and programs being brought together in a very rapid fashion to try new things and fail fast and scale quickly.
Quinn Nakayama, I always love diving into your brain and learning a little bit each time we talk. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Quinn Nakayama for joining the podcast. Factor This is a production of Renewable Energy World and Clarion Energy. Join us every Monday as we break down the energy transition's biggest stories with industry leaders who actually move the needle. And please leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Factor This from Renewable Energy World.